Great to see you both. David Gazzard, to you first. The former Prime Minister John Howard says that Anthony Albanese is on day 9 of squeezing the lemon on this story about, I like the phrase there from John Howard, on the Scott Morrison secret ministries. What's your view on it now? The former Prime Minister's response to it has been largely unrepentant.
Well, I think you've got to contextualise it, Kieran, with all the other things that were going on through what was a global crisis. So this was one decision among many thousands in what was an extraordinary time. So, to unpick the one when, I don't think Scott Morrison has come out and apologised for it, but he's virtually said that. He said, look, with the benefit of hindsight, he probably wouldn't do the same thing again. But it was really just it was a completely freakish time. I mean, you had national cabinet that was set up. That was totally, constitutionally weird at the time. You had border closures. People were trying to get vaccines. There was, all sorts of things that were going on that required radical action. And this was one of those things. So, with the benefit of hindsight, you probably can say, well, the former Prime Minister shouldn't have done that. And I think he's acknowledged as much. But to John Howard's point, to take 9 days to trawl back over this, to have a separate inquiry about it, I get the politics of it. It's opportunistic, and you're looking to tarnish the legacy of your predecessor, and governments of both persuasions do that. But at some point, you need to move the needle back to the issues that everyday voters are concerned about, and it's not that, particularly when Australia did really, really well in managing the pandemic under the previous administration.
Eamonn, what's your read on this? Where to from here with another inquiry to come?
Well, Kieran, my view is, one of the beauties of living in a strong Western liberal democracy is that we can chew gum and walk at the same time. Let us review some of those calls. I don't think there's anyone in Australia right now, including Scott Morrison himself, who doesn't think they were pretty exceptional decisions. So if we are truly to protect the way our system runs, let's have a look at it. I don't think that's that big a deal. As long as it's not the only thing the government is doing, and it's not. I mean, I think, as David talks about, the government's got to get on with dealing with the issues people care about. That's right, economic management, jobs, skills. There's a forum coming up. There's a budget coming up. All those things are happening at the same time. I'm not so worried about what John Howard thinks. I'd be more worried about what Josh Frydenberg would have to say, or Matthias Cormann, or Keith Pitt. Karen Andrews, we know what she has to say about it. It's the ministers who served with Scott Morrison who had himself sworn into their portfolios that they did not know about. Let's worry about what they have to say. So I think there's room for both. I think we can have a proper look at it, and we should, as a mature democracy. And I think the government can get on with its own agenda, which it's doing.
That's a valid point. Those colleagues, David, large number of them have been furious at the news as it emerged.
Yeah, look, I sort of feel for them. I think that's one of the reasons why the former Prime Minister has phoned them and apologised to them. It would be embarrassing to find out that these powers had been, or they'd been sought. The point I think that Morrison is trying to make, it would be an entirely different thing had they been used. There's sort of this view out there that this has been the undermining of democracy, which would have a lot more resonance if there was a demonstrable case of the powers actually having been used when they weren't. They were more sitting there in reserve in case, all hell broke loose, which of course was a possibility at the time, at least in the first instance, and with the threatened outbreak of new strains of COVID. So, I think the interesting thing for me, and I don't usually read through the comment sections in news reporting, but most of the public, I think, sort of gets this. It's sort of they had to sit at home, educating their kid over Zoom. They couldn't go to work. They were worried about where they could get, everything from toilet paper to the proper sanitizer. They knew that this was an unusual time. It was a global crisis. and they expected the Prime Minister to use as many powers as they can. In fact, they were frustrated that he couldn't overrule the states. They were frustrated that he couldn't overrule local government in some cases. They thought he could do that. They thought he could open borders unilaterally. They thought he could do all sorts of things. So it really, looked at in the context of what was going on 2 years ago, probably isn't that extraordinary at all.
The problem was the secrecy. If they're upfront about it at that time, it all would have been, I think, received like every other extraordinary measure that no one would have blinked an eye at. But, Eamonn, when you look at the summit coming up next week, what's crucial here? You've seen these things happen before with other governments, Labor governments. What needs to be achieved by Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese at the Jobs Summit, in your view, to make it a success?
Kieran, I think there's a couple of things that absolutely need to happen. One is establishing a new operating environment, which is consensus and agreement and inclusion. The mere hosting of this, I think, does that. Secondly, just making sure we've got proper outcomes that everyone is working toward. And I'm pretty confident that even already, with the amount of pre-work that's gone into it, we've got people coming together, industries and sectors coming together. So I think as long as there is a clear and very simple plan that comes out of that, which everyone can agree on, then we are at a better starting position than at any time in the last 8 or 9 years. And that is an agreement that we have to have the best skilled workforce. We've got to have the best opportunities for Australians to join that skilled workforce and give them those training opportunities. Everybody wants that. Governments, employers, unions, everybody wants that. That we have a proper pathway for workers who are coming in from overseas. Let's not forget, our economy, we are a migrant nation. Our economy is a migrant economy. We always depend on successive waves of migrants to do the jobs. We need to keep this country going. So we need a pathway and an agreement around that says we're not just bringing in cheap workers, we're bringing in workers with a proper view to making them permanent residents, and ultimately, as I was, people who can become Australians and learn to live and love this country and love being here and all the things about it. So I think all of those factors need to take place as we get, as a result of this, what should be a really superb event.